Hi everyone, welcome back to Julia's story. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. Rain has a way of finding every gap. It slipped past the seams of my coat and settled into my bones, a steady cold that felt older than the day. The city lights made the puddles glow like coins I could never spend. I stood beneath the cracked awning of the bakery where I sometimes swept floors for scraps, clutching a paper bag that went soft at the corners. Inside was a single heel of bread, rough and stale, the last thing between me and the kind of hunger that bends your thoughts into knots. I told myself I would make it last. I told myself I could soften it in hot water and call it soup. The lies we tell to stay upright are tender things. You learn to whisper them like prayers. Across the street, a man sat on the curb, knees drawn up, jacket soaked straight through. He looked like the rain had chosen him and the world had agreed. Most people stepped around him the way you step around a crack in the sidewalk. You notice it. You do not change course. A bus hissed to a stop. A woman lifted her umbrella higher. The bakery's door clicked open and shut, releasing pockets of warm air and the smell of cinnamon that clung to me without asking permission. I told myself to walk home, to fold myself into the thin blanket that still remembered better days. I told myself to stop looking at him, but he lifted his head and met my eyes, and it felt like the city fell quiet for a breath. He did not ask. Not for money, not for food, not for anything. There was a stillness in him that was not pride and not defeat. It was the kind of stillness you get when you have run out of words that matter. I crossed the street before I could talk myself out of it. The rain made my skirt heavy. The bag grew wetter in my hands. When I reached him, I knelt to bring us closer to the same world. The curb smelled like oil and river water. Up close, he looked younger than I thought, though tired in a way that does not keep track of birthdays. There was a clean line of stubble along his jaw and a bruise of sleeplessness under his eyes. "Are you hungry?" I asked. He blinked, slow. "Yes." I held the paper bag out, and for a moment he did not move. He glanced at it, then at my face, then at the rain beating a rhythm on the street. When he took it, he did so with both hands, careful as if he was receiving something breakable. "This is yours," he said. "It was," I answered. "Now it is not." He opened the bag and looked at the bread like it was a map. He tore it in half with careful fingers, as if there were rules about how it should be done, and held one piece back out to me. "Share it with me," he said. I shook my head. "You need it more." A muscle in his cheek tightened, and for a second the calm inside him wavered. "So do you." I almost smiled. "I am good at pretending I do not." The rain softened from needles to threads. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them and nodded once like a man agreeing to something he could not see. He ate slowly. Not the way you eat when you do not know when the next meal is coming, but the way you eat when you have remembered your mouth is a part of you worth being gentle to. When he finished, he crumpled the bag as small as it would go and slipped it into the pocket of his soaked jacket. "Thank you," he said, and the words were not heavy and not light. They sat in the air between us like something correct. "You are welcome," I said. He studied me the way people study doorways when they have to choose whether to walk through. Up close, his eyes were a color I could not name, some mix of gray and green that shifted when the streetlight flickered. He looked like a person who was used to listening more than he spoke. There was a steadiness to his voice, even now, even here on the curb in shoes that had lost a fight with the weather. "Do you live nearby?" he asked. "Close enough when it is dry," I said. "Far when it is not." He nodded. "I know that distance." There was a pause that did not feel empty. A taxi splashed through a puddle and painted our shoes with a new coat of wet. Somewhere, a siren threaded the night and then faded. I realized I was shivering not only from cold. There are moments you step into that make your life feel like a different size. I felt one of them settling around us, careful as a cloak. "What is your name?" he asked. "Mira," I said, using the name my grandmother liked best because it tasted like rain when you said it. "Yours." He hesitated like a man deciding which truth to take out of his pocket. "Adrian." I rolled the sound of it around once in my head and put it away where I keep things I am not ready to understand. "You should find shelter," I said. "There is a church on Willow with a roof that only leaks on one side." His mouth tilted, not quite a smile, more like a note in the margin of a page. "I will try." He made to stand, and the effort pulled a soft sound from him he did not mean to let escape. I reached for his arm without thinking. His jacket was cold and rough beneath my fingers. He steadied and looked at me in a way that asked something without making me answer. "Thank you," he said again, softer now. I let go and stepped back a little, instinct tugging at me to leave before kindness asked me for more than I could give. He tucked his hands into his pockets the way you do when you want to tell them to stop shaking. For a second, we stood in the rain like two pins on a map that someone had pushed too close together. "If I can ever repay you," he started, and I shook my head. "Do not," I said. "Let it be small and finished. Some gifts should not carry a debt." He was quiet. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a handkerchief, white turned gray by the night, edges stitched with initials so faint I could not read them. He held it out, and I looked at it, then at him. "For your hands," he said. "They are shaking." I had not noticed they were. I took the cloth and pressed it between my palms. It held the faintest scent of soap and something warmer that I could not place. I slid it into my coat, and it felt like putting away a promise I had not made. When I looked up, he was watching me with that same steady attention that made the noise of the street recede. He lifted a hand in a small wave, then turned and walked down the block at an unhurried pace, as if he trusted the night to hold him up. I stood under the awning and watched until the shape of him was only a darker stripe against the wet air. The bakery door opened again behind me. The old man who owned the place stepped out to dump a bucket of water, then paused when he saw me. "You cannot stand out here forever, Mira," he said. "The rain will learn your name." "It already knows it," I said. He made a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been a sigh, then went back inside to stack trays that had seen more mornings than I had. I walked home with the handkerchief warm in my pocket and the taste of bread on my tongue. The night smelled like wet concrete and a future I was not ready to believe in. In my room, I lit the small candle that throws more shadow than light and wrung the water from my hem over the basin. I lay down and pulled the thin blanket up to my chin. The roof creaked as the building settled into the dark. Somewhere a neighbor coughed. Somewhere a cat walked a ledge it had no business trusting. I closed my eyes, and the city kept breathing without me. Behind my ribs, a question paced from one wall of my chest to the other. It was not about debt. It was not about luck. It was about the way a stranger had looked at me and made the world go quiet, if only for a breath. When sleep finally found me, it brought the sound of rain woven with a name that did not yet belong to my life. I told myself that in the morning I would go back to the bakery, sweep flour into soft little clouds, and make a fist around the day until it yielded something worth keeping. I told myself the moment on the curb would pass the way all moments pass. I did not know it had already chosen to stay. The morning after, the city felt different, though I told myself it was only the sunlight after too much rain. The bakery smelled like it always did, warm, yeasty, with a hint of cinnamon that clung to my skin as I swept the floor. I was half dreaming, moving the broom back and forth, when the door opened and a little bell above it jingled. I glanced up, expecting the usual customers, the old woman who bought day-old rolls, the delivery boy with his muddy boots. But instead, it was him. The stranger from the curb. Only he didn't look like the man I had shared bread with last night. He wasn't drenched, and he wasn't sitting with his knees pulled up like the world had pressed him flat. Today, he wore a clean shirt, dark trousers, and shoes that hadn't seen a puddle. His hair was brushed back, and though his face still carried that same quiet weariness, he moved with a kind of certainty that didn't belong to someone sleeping on a sidewalk. For a moment, I froze, my broom stilled in mid-air. My first thought was that I had dreamed him entirely, that maybe I had handed my last bread to a ghost, and here was his living twin, sent to confuse me. He walked straight to the counter, and the old man behind it looked up, startled, because customers who dressed like this didn't usually wander into our bakery. The stranger scanned the shelves, then asked for a loaf, one of the fresh, crusty ones that I had never tasted in my life. He pulled out a wallet, smooth leather, thick enough that I knew it had more inside than I'd ever seen at once. I tried not to stare. I failed. When he paid, he turned, and his eyes caught mine. The same gray-green, steady, like rain trapped in glass. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. He walked toward me slowly, the paper bag with the bread tucked under his arm. "You're here," he said, as if he had expected to find me all along. My throat tightened. "I work sometimes," I managed. My hands gripped the broom like it was the only thing keeping me upright. He tilted his head, studying me. "Do they pay you enough?" I laughed, short and sharp. "Enough for what?" "For bread," he said simply. That answer stopped me. It was too direct, too close to the truth. "Sometimes," I admitted. He nodded once, thoughtful. Then, without asking, he set his fresh loaf on the counter beside me. "Then this is for you." I shook my head immediately. "No, I can't." "You gave me your last bread," he interrupted softly. "This is mine to give back." The old man behind the counter frowned but said nothing, busying himself with trays. I could feel heat rising in my cheeks, the kind that comes from being seen when you aren't used to it. I wanted to refuse, but the smell of that bread, warm, golden, wrapped around me, and I realized how long it had been since I had eaten anything that wasn't stale. I reached out, hesitant, and took it. "Thank you," I whispered. He smiled faintly. "Now we're even." But the way he said it didn't feel final. It felt like a beginning. Before I could find words, the bell above the door jingled again, and another customer stepped in. The stranger glanced toward the street, then back at me. "I'll see you again, Mira," he said. He didn't ask if he could. He just said it like a promise. Then he left, the bell chiming softly behind him, leaving me holding bread warm enough to burn my palms. I stood there, heart pounding, watching his shape disappear into the light. And I knew, without understanding why, that my life had just shifted a little, the way a path bends before you even notice you've turned. The days in the bakery blurred into each other, flour dust rising and falling like tired snow. But ever since that morning, when Adrian walked in and left me with warm bread in my hands, I felt myself waiting. Every time the bell above the door jingled, my chest tightened with expectation. Most times, it was only a customer with coins carefully counted out. Sometimes it was no one at all, just the wind. 3 days passed before he returned. It was late afternoon, the kind of hour when the bakery was half empty, the loaves growing stale on the shelves. I was wiping down tables, my arms aching, when the bell rang. I didn't look up right away, but then a shadow fell across me, and I knew before I raised my head. Adrian. He wasn't dressed like before. Not a polished shirt or fine shoes this time. He wore a simple jacket, his hair a little messy, but there was still something about the way he carried himself, like a man who belonged anywhere he stepped. "You work too much," he said, eyes flicking to the rag in my hand. I smirked. "You notice things quickly." "I notice you," he said. Just like that. Plain. Direct. And it made my stomach flutter in a way I wasn't ready to admit. I laughed softly, shaking my head. "So, what are you doing here again?" You don't seem like the kind of man who comes to bakeries for stale rolls." "You're right," he said. "I came for you." My hand stilled on the table. "For me." He nodded, serious now. "I need help. And I think you're the kind of person who won't turn away from someone in need. You didn't before." I frowned, unsure if this was some strange test. "What kind of help?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I need someone I can trust. Someone to work with me. It's complicated, but it pays better than this place." His eyes dropped to my thin wrists, the fraying edges of my sleeves, then rose back to meet mine. "Much better." I stiffened. "What kind of job is this? Because if it's nothing dishonorable," he cut in quickly, reading my thoughts before I said them aloud. "I promise you that. Think of it more like assisting me, keeping me company, helping me with day-to-day things I can't manage alone right now." The way he said it made me curious, though suspicion still lingered. "Why me? You don't even know me." His gaze softened. "I know enough. You gave your last bread to a stranger. That tells me more about you than most people ever reveal." Silence stretched between us. Behind the counter, the old baker coughed loudly, pretending not to listen. I stared at Adrian, at the steadiness in his eyes, at the strange way his words curled around the edges of my heart. "What would I have to do?" I asked carefully. "Come with me tomorrow," he said. "See for yourself. If you don't like it, you can walk away. No questions. No debts." It should have been easy to say no, to return to sweeping floors and collecting scraps. But I found myself nodding, the words slipping out before I could stop it. "All right." A slow smile touched his lips, the kind that carried weight. "Good. Tomorrow morning. I'll be waiting outside." Then, like always, he left without lingering. The bell chimed softly, and he was gone. I stood frozen in the empty bakery, the rag limp in my hand, wondering what I had just agreed to. Something told me this wasn't just a job. This was a door. And I had just stepped through it without knowing where it led. The next morning, the sky was gray, heavy with clouds that looked like they might spill rain at any moment. I almost convinced myself not to go. My life was hard, yes, but it was familiar. This, whatever Adrian was offering, felt like stepping into a storm I didn't understand. But when I opened the bakery door, he was already there, leaning casually against a sleek black car, the kind I'd only seen in magazines. His hands were in his pockets, his jacket neat, his posture relaxed, as if he had all the time in the world. "You came," he said, his lips curling in a small, satisfied smile. "I said I would," I replied, though my voice wavered slightly. He opened the car door for me without another word. My hesitation lasted only a breath before I slid into the seat. The leather was smooth, cold at first, then warming beneath me. Everything smelled faintly expensive, like newness and polish. The drive was quiet. I kept my eyes on the city as it slipped past. Gray streets, old brick walls, children darting barefoot between puddles. Places I knew well. But as we drove further, the scenery changed. Buildings grew taller, newer, gleaming with glass. Shops displayed things I couldn't even imagine affording. People in pressed suits hurried past with coffee cups in hand. And then, finally, the car slowed. I turned my head, and my breath caught. A mansion. It stood behind tall iron gates, white stone glowing against the dull sky, its windows reflecting the faint light like mirrors. The driveway curved elegantly, lined with trimmed hedges and marble statues. A fountain sparkled in the center, water spilling gracefully into a pool. "This is where you live?" I whispered before I could stop myself. Adrian glanced at me, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Yes." Surprised. Surprised wasn't even the word. My mind reeled, trying to connect the man who had sat on a wet curb eating my last piece of bread with a man who walked me into this palace. We passed through the gates, and the car rolled up the driveway. My heart hammered against my ribs. I couldn't bring myself to touch anything, afraid I might break it just by existing too close. When we stopped, Adrian came around to open my door. I stepped out carefully, my shoes sinking slightly into the smooth gravel. The house loomed above me, vast and intimidating, like it was alive and watching. Inside was worse. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, spilling light over polished marble floors. Tall paintings lined the walls, faces I didn't recognize, but they looked like they had belonged to important people. A grand staircase curled upward like a ribbon, its banister gleaming. I didn't belong here. That thought screamed in my head, sharp and undeniable. "Don't be afraid," Adrian said quietly, almost as though he'd read my mind. His voice was softer now, meant only for me. "It's just a house. Just a house." I let out a nervous laugh. "It's bigger than my entire street." He studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Come on. Let me show you what I brought you here for." I followed him down a wide hallway that seemed to stretch forever. My reflection stared back at me in the polished floors, a poor girl in worn shoes trailing behind a man who could buy anything. My stomach twisted with nerves, but my curiosity pulled me forward. Whatever this was, it was no longer about bread. No longer about charity. I had walked into another world, and Adrian was at the center of it. And somehow, I already sensed that leaving it would never be simple again. Adrian led me into a smaller room tucked away from the grand hall, and for a moment I could breathe again. It wasn't lined with chandeliers or marble, but with books, shelves upon shelves of them, stretching from floor to ceiling. The scent of old paper filled the air, grounding me in a way the glitter of the rest of the house hadn't. "This is my favorite room," he said, moving his hand along the spines of the books like he was greeting old friends. "Less intimidating, I think." I nodded, though my eyes were still wide. "It feels different, like someone could actually live here." That made him chuckle, a low sound that pulled my gaze to him. For a moment, he didn't look like a man who owned everything he touched. He looked human. He sat down at a desk near the window and gestured for me to sit opposite him. The chair was soft, sinking under my weight. I clutched my hands in my lap, waiting for him to explain. "You asked what I needed," he began, his eyes serious now. "I'm not asking you to scrub floors or polish silver. I have people for that. What I need is something different." I frowned. "Then what exactly?" He leaned forward slightly. "Company. Honesty. Someone to talk to who doesn't want anything from me. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" I blinked, unsure how to respond. "You want me to keep you company?" "Yes," he said simply. "Sometimes that means sharing meals. Sometimes it means listening. Sometimes it might mean going with me to an event so people stop asking questions." My stomach tightened. "So you want me to pretend to be, what? Your friend? Your date?" His expression softened, though his eyes didn't waver from mine. "If that's how you want to see it. Nothing more unless you choose it." I swallowed hard. The idea was ridiculous. Me, poor, ordinary Mira, sitting at the table of men who wore suits worth more than my entire block. Me pretending to belong, pretending not to see the way their wives' diamonds glinted in candlelight. And yet, something about the way he asked wasn't cruel. He wasn't mocking me. If anything, he seemed hopeful. "Why me?" I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because you're the only one who didn't look at me and see a wallet," he said. His gaze held mine, steady and unflinching. "You gave me bread when you had nothing. I can't buy that kind of honesty." Silence stretched, heavy with something unspoken. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. "You'll be paid well," he added gently. "More than you've ever earned. Enough to make a difference." That part stung. The reminder of what I didn't have. Of what he could offer with just a flick of his hand. I should have walked away. I should have told him I wasn't for sale, that I didn't need his pity or his promises. But instead, the words slipped out before I could stop them. "All right, I'll do it." His smile was faint but real, curling at the edges of his lips. "Good." When he stood and offered his hand, I hesitated before taking it. His palm was warm, his grip steady. For one dizzy second, I wondered if I had just made the best choice of my life, or the worst. Because in that library, with his eyes on mine and my hand in his, I felt the lines of my world blurring. And once blurred, I knew they would never be sharp again. The first time Adrian invited me to dinner, I almost said no. The thought of walking into a dining room big enough to swallow my whole neighborhood made my stomach knot. But the memory of his steady eyes in the library, the way he had asked without mocking, made me swallow my fear. That evening, I stood outside his mansion once again, wearing the only dress I owned. It was plain, faded from too many washes, but at least it was clean. I kept tugging at the hem, wishing it was longer, wishing it looked less cheap. When Adrian appeared at the top of the staircase, he wasn't in one of those sharp suits. He wore a simple button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and yet somehow, he still looked like someone out of reach. His gaze swept over me once, and instead of pity, I caught something like quiet approval. "You look lovely," he said. I nearly laughed, certain he was lying, but his voice didn't falter. My cheeks grew hot, and I mumbled a quick thank you. The dining room was as overwhelming as I'd feared. A long table stretched endlessly, covered in fine china and silver that gleamed under the chandelier's golden light. A servant pulled out a chair for me, and I sat stiffly, trying not to break anything. Adrian sat across from me, but the table between us felt like a mile. When the first course arrived, soup served in delicate bowls, I almost didn't know how to hold the spoon. I hesitated, but Adrian noticed. With a small smile, he picked up his own spoon and began eating slowly, as if to show me there was no wrong way. Something about that eased my nerves, though my hands still trembled. We ate in silence for a while, the sounds of silver against porcelain filling the room. But after a few minutes, Adrian leaned back slightly, watching me. "Do you always eat so carefully?" he asked, his tone light. I froze, my spoon halfway to my lips. "Carefully? I'm just trying not to embarrass myself." His smile widened, not unkind. "You don't need to try so hard. This place, these rituals, they don't matter as much as you think." I set the spoon down, my voice soft. "Maybe not for you, but for me, this is another world." He studied me quietly, then nodded. "You're right. And maybe that's why I wanted you here. To remind me that this isn't the only world." His words struck me deeper than I expected. I didn't know how to respond, so I kept my eyes on my soup, my chest tightening with something I couldn't name. By the time dessert came, tiny cakes dusted with sugar, I had relaxed enough to taste one without fear. It melted sweetly on my tongue, and I must have closed my eyes, because when I opened them, Adrian was watching me again, his lips curved in the faintest smile. "What?" I asked nervously. "Nothing," he said, shaking his head. "I just like seeing you enjoy something." My heart skipped. For the rest of the evening, we spoke little, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was thick with awareness, with the strange pull I felt every time his eyes lingered on me. When I finally left the mansion that night, the cool air hit my skin, and I realized something that made my knees weak. This wasn't just a job anymore, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what it was becoming. The more time I spent in Adrian's mansion, the more I felt myself being pulled into his world. Each morning I arrived, each evening I left, but in between, The hours stretched into something strange, something dangerous. I told myself it was just a job, yet my heart whispered otherwise. That whisper grew louder after the first dinner. The next few days, I noticed the way Adrian looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. His eyes lingered a little too long, his smile softened a little too much. And when we spoke, he seemed to forget the distance between us, the distance of class, of wealth, of everything that made us impossibly different. But not everyone forgot. One afternoon, I wandered into the garden behind the mansion. The roses were in full bloom, their colors bright against the trimmed hedges. I bent to touch a soft pink petal, my fingers careful, when I heard voices. "Why her?" A woman's sharp tone drifted through the air. I froze. "She's nothing, Adrian," the woman continued. "A poor girl with no manners, no background. People will laugh if you bring her into your world." There was silence, then Adrian's voice, calm but edged with steel. "People already laugh, Elizabeth. I don't care. And she's not nothing." The woman scoffed. "You think she cares about you? She sees money, Adrian. That's all she sees. Don't fool yourself." I should have walked away. I should have made noise, announced myself, anything. But I stood rooted to the ground, my breath shallow, listening. Finally, footsteps retreated, and silence settled again. I leaned against the hedge, my chest tight. Elizabeth. Whoever she wasn't wrong about one thing. I didn't belong here. The very thought of me sitting beside Adrian in this glittering life was laughable. I had no dresses, no name, no place. And yet, when I remembered his voice, the way he had said I wasn't nothing, a dangerous warmth spread through me. That night, lying on my narrow bed back in the bakery loft, I stared at the cracked ceiling and fought with myself. Maybe Elizabeth was right. Maybe Adrian only thought he saw something in me because I wasn't like the others. But what if it was more? What if, beneath the weight of wealth and expectation, he truly meant what he said? The question burned inside me, restless and unresolved. I told myself I should quit. Walk away before I drowned in feelings that weren't mine to have. Before whispers turned into scandals, and stares turned into scars I couldn't heal. But the truth was, the thought of leaving him felt heavier than the thought of staying. And that terrified me most of all. The storm broke on a night I hadn't expected. I was supposed to just share another dinner with Adrian. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. But the moment I stepped into the dining room, I sensed the shift. The air was heavier, his posture more restless. He didn't sit across the table this time. He chose the chair beside me. Too close. Close enough that I could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing. We ate in silence, though the food might as well have been stone. My heart beat too loudly, drowning out every sound of silver against porcelain. I kept my eyes down, afraid of what I might see if I met his gaze. Finally, he set his fork down and leaned back, his voice low. I heard what Elizabeth said. I stiffened, the memory of that sharp voice in the garden clawing its way back. I hadn't known if he'd realized I'd overheard, but now it didn't matter. His eyes were on me, unblinking. "She's wrong," he continued. "You're not here because of my money. I know that, but I need to hear it from you." I swallowed hard. "Adrian." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, his expression raw, stripped of all the usual calm. "Tell me you don't feel it. Tell me I'm imagining it, that the pull between us is just in my head." My breath caught. The world seemed to narrow until it was just his voice, his eyes, his nearness. "Because if I'm wrong," he whispered, "I'll stop. I'll let you go. But if I'm right," his words trailed off, heavy with everything unsaid. I should have lied. I should have laughed it off, pretended I didn't understand. It would have been safer. For him, for me, for the fragile walls between our lives. But when I finally lifted my gaze to his, The truth slipped out like it had been waiting all along. "You're not imagining it." The silence that followed was electric, thick enough to choke on. His eyes darkened, his jaw tightening as though he was fighting something inside himself. "Damn it," he muttered, pushing back from the table. He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Rain had begun to fall outside, streaking the glass in silver lines. I remained frozen, my hands clenched in my lap, every muscle trembling. He turned back suddenly, his eyes burning. "Do you understand what this means? If I let this happen, everything changes. People will talk, they'll tear you apart, they'll say you're using me." I rose slowly from my chair, though my legs felt weak. "They'll talk no matter what I do. They always do." For a long moment, he stared at me, caught between fear and desire, between duty and the pull that had already gone too far. Then, as if some invisible thread snapped, he closed the distance in 2 strides. His hand brushed my cheek, tentative at first, then firmer as though claiming something he had denied too long. "Mira!" He breathed my name like a question and a confession all at once. And before I could think, before I could stop the spiral, his lips pressed against mine. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was fire meeting dry wood, sudden and consuming, a kiss that left no room for doubt. When he finally pulled away, his forehead rested against mine, his voice hoarse. "This is dangerous," he whispered. I knew he was right, but as my heart pounded wildly, I also knew one thing with terrifying clarity. Danger had never felt so right. The kiss changed everything. From that night forward, nothing between Adrian and me felt simple. The lines we had drawn were gone, erased by a moment of fire neither of us could deny. And yet, instead of making things easier, it only made the walls around us higher. The next morning, he avoided me. His usual calm greetings were clipped, his gaze never quite meeting mine. I felt the distance like a cold wind, and though part of me wanted to demand answers, another part was too afraid of what he might say. But the world outside his mansion didn't stay silent either. Whispers began to spread. Servants exchanged knowing glances when I passed. A driver muttered something under his breath that I couldn't quite catch, but the laughter that followed was sharp enough to cut. And then came Elizabeth. She appeared uninvited one evening, stepping into the hall like she owned it. Dressed in a sleek black dress, her smile was too sweet to be real. "Adrian," she purred, kissing his cheek. "You've been difficult to reach lately. Busy, I suppose." His jaw tightened, but he nodded politely. "Elizabeth." Her eyes flicked toward me, narrowing. "And here she is. The charity project. How touching." Heat flared in my cheeks, but before I could speak, Adrian's voice hardened. "That's enough." Elizabeth's laugh was low and cruel. "Oh, Adrian, you think this will last? She's playing you. The world will never accept her. And when you realize it, it'll be too late." She swept past me then, her perfume thick in the air, her words lingering like poison. That night, Adrian and I sat in the library, the silence between us sharp. Finally, he spoke. "She's not wrong, Mira. Whatever this is, it can't survive outside these walls. People will destroy you for being near me. They'll twist your kindness into greed. They'll call you names you don't deserve." I stared at him, my chest heavy. "And what about you? Will you believe them?" His eyes flickered, as though the question hit too close. He didn't answer right away, and the pause hurt more than if he had said yes. I stood, my hands trembling. "You told me I wasn't nothing, that I was different. But now you're telling me I'm not strong enough to stand beside you." "Mira." His voice broke on my name. He reached for me, but I stepped back, the distance between us suddenly insurmountable. "If you don't trust me," I whispered, "then maybe this was a mistake." The look in his eyes was agony, but neither of us moved. We were trapped in a war of feelings, wanting each other, yet torn apart by fear, pride, and the weight of the world. That night, I left the mansion with tears blurring the streetlights. And for the first time since Adrian had entered my life, I wondered if giving him that last piece of bread had been a blessing, or the start of a heartbreak I wasn't strong enough to survive. The days after I walked out of Adrian's mansion were some of the hardest I'd ever known. The bakery felt colder, the streets lonelier, and every loaf of bread I baked carried the taste of absence. I tried to convince myself it was better this way, that I had saved myself from a fire too dangerous to stand in. But every night, when the shop was quiet and the city lights glowed faintly outside my window, I felt the emptiness claw at me. I thought Adrian would forget me, retreat back into his polished world where I never truly belonged. But he didn't. One evening, as I closed the bakery shutters, a sleek car pulled up by the curb. My heart stuttered before I even saw him step out. Adrian. His suit was sharp, but his eyes looked tired, restless, as if he hadn't slept since the night I left. "Mira," he said softly. I froze, my hand gripping the shutter. "Why are you here?" "Because I can't do this without you." His voice was raw, stripped of every layer of control. "You were right, I was afraid. Afraid of what people would say, afraid of losing everything I've built. But what's the point of all of it, if it means losing you?" I shook my head, my chest tight. "Adrian, you don't understand. Your world isn't made for someone like me. Elizabeth, the whispers, the looks, they'll never stop. And my voice faltered. I don't know if I'm strong enough." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, but his tone was gentle. "Then let me be strong for us both. Let them talk, let them laugh. I don't care. All I care about is the woman who gave me her last piece of bread when she had nothing. That's the woman I fell in love with. That's the woman I can't let go." My throat tightened, tears pricking my eyes. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let the walls inside me fall. He reached for my hand, his fingers trembling against mine. "I'm not asking you to step into my world alone. I'm asking you to let me step into yours. Here. With you. Whatever it takes." For a long moment, I searched his eyes, looking for cracks, for hesitation. But there was none. Just truth. Just him. And with that, the fear that had gripped me for so long loosened its hold. I let out a shaky breath and finally whispered, "I don't want to lose you either." Adrian's shoulders sagged with relief, and in the dim glow of the streetlight, he pulled me into his arms. His embrace was warm, steady, the kind of shelter I hadn't realized I'd been searching for. The world might still talk. The whispers might never end. But in that moment, as his lips brushed mine again, this time tender, certain, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. Love wasn't about belonging to the right world. It was about choosing each other, no matter the cost. And I chose him. Sometimes I think back to that night on the corner street, when I tore my last piece of bread in half and gave it to a stranger. I was cold, hungry, and barely holding on. I had no idea who he was, no idea that a single act of kindness would set fire to the course of my life. Adrian always teases me about it now. He'll say, "You fed me before you even knew my name. How could I not fall for you?" And every time I laugh, though deep down, I know he's right. That small moment was where it all began. The whispers haven't stopped. Some people still look at me like I don't belong, like I'm a mistake walking beside him. But I've learned to stop listening. Because at night, when we close the door on the world, it's just us. No money, no power, no lies. Just the man who saw me, and the girl who dared to choose him. Life is far from perfect. We still fight, we still stumble, we still carry scars from the paths we walked before we found each other. But we also laugh until our sides ache, We share breakfasts in the kitchen with flour still on my hands, and sometimes, when the city grows too loud, we escape to the quiet of the countryside, where roses grow wild and free. I gave away my last bread to a stranger once. What I never expected was that it would feed me back with a love strong enough to change everything. And now, no matter what the world says, I know this truth. I wasn't just a poor girl who offered her bread. I was a woman who found a love worth everything.